This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Catherine Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here will focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. Whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Catherine Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so honored you're here. Happy June, y'all. This series means a lot to me. Many of us are dealing with our mental health, working through it, trying to figure out how to be better people on the other side, in addition to doing the same thing for our children. So I felt like the best way to wrap up this mental health series was to interview a child psychologist. And she's not just a child psychologist, but she's also one of my very, very best friends. Dina and I met in the hallway at the Children's Hospital. Our hand-to-hold mentor, which we both had, introduced the two of us. We happened to have the same hospital stay and many of the same specialists. And as it turns out, we became incredibly good friends. And coincidentally, that was the only hospital stay of dozens that we had between us that we were ever there at the same time. So I believe we were meant to be friends. And I believe that she is the person that you were meant to hear today about child psychology and how it can really benefit your child, help them find their place in the world, but also help them cope with a difficult medical diagnosis or something difficult in their life. Our NICU babies are warriors, but sometimes our warriors need a little bit of assistance. So today's guest is Dr. Dina O'Brien. She's a licensed pediatric clinical psychologist, currently working with Marybridge Children's Hospital and Harbor Pediatrics in Gig Harbor, Washington. She has over 25 years of experience working with the mental health needs of children and teens. And in her spare time, she enjoys spending time with her husband and her 4 boys, and also spotting a few orcas across the Pacific Northwest. So with that, let's chat. Well, Dina, thank you for being here. I feel like I should apologize to everyone that if you and I start to default into friend mode because we've known each other since our boys were in the neonatal intensive care unit, blanket apology. But in addition to being a great mom of 4 boys, you are also you have a real day job. So how did you pursue this career in pediatric psychology? Of all the things that you could have chosen, why pediatric psychology?
Oh, such a good question. Catherine, I feel like even in high school, I was drawn to the field of psychology and kind of had made up my mind to major in psychology in college. But it was in graduate school where I was really exposed to a lot of different clinical settings, everything from juvenile detention to community mental health. And finally, I did a medical psychology internship at Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children in Dallas. And it was then that I really narrowed my focus and realized that specializing in pediatric health psychology was what I wanted to do. I really loved working alongside the doctors and nurses and physical therapists. And I was just inspired by the resilience that the children and families demonstrated, even in the face of really significant challenges. I saw the amazing improvements that were made and could be made, and I realized it was an area where I could make an impact and a difference. And so that's why I decided to kind of continue that throughout my residency and fellowship and my career today.
Well, you're good at it. I know that I was the beneficiary of that as your friend, but also inquiring about how we navigated life after the NICU. So if people maybe aren't fully aware of what a pediatric psychologist does, what's primary role, primary purpose of what you do with children and adolescents?
Good question. Okay. So a pediatric psychologist is kind of a combination between a child psychologist who specializes in just child and adolescent development and overall mental health, and also someone who specializes in assessing and treating the psychological impact of chronic and acute illness. So, as a pediatric health psychologist, we do all of the general things that we would do, like diagnosing mental health conditions, clarifying treatment needs, um, In addition to working with the child's medical team and school staff, we make recommendations, design therapeutic interventions based on everything that's going on. And the goals of therapy would really include various things like understanding the impact of a new medical diagnosis, helping to improve a child's quality of life, dealing with pain management, things like increasing their ability to follow a medical regimen, decrease anxiety around procedures, and even just lessen the overall impact that an illness has on a child and family's well being. So, I've worked in different settings, including various children's hospitals over the years. And currently, I'm working at an outpatient pediatric primary care office that's affiliated with a local children's hospital. So, I see kids that have acute and chronic health issues, as well as kids who are just referred from their pediatricians with general mental health conditions such as ADHD and anxiety.
So basically, everyone needs to get themselves if you have a NICU baby. I'm listening to what you say and I'm thinking, what a
Check,
what a
check, check.
benefit. Yeah, what a benefit. So I'm curious. So I know that you've told us about why you pursued it, what it is you do, but the part of your story that I didn't mention in the intro is that you yourself had a NICU baby. And I'm curious, Dina, how your background in psychology either helped your process through the NICU with your fourth boy or hindered your ability to be, the best mom for him. So walk us through a little bit of what that was like for your family and what that was like for you professionally as a psychologist. I know that's a loaded question.
It was tough. In thinking about this, I would say in some ways it helped, and in some ways it made it a lot harder. I certainly had the benefit of understanding the ins and outs of how a hospital and how medical care worked. And I knew about the roles that various specialists played and the importance of self advocacy and clear communication. And I knew about early child development and the risks that come with prematurity. So it helped me to know who to talk to and who to ask my questions to and how to get needs met. But oftentimes I feel like I knew enough to just cause myself a lot of stress and anxiety. Perhaps not surprisingly, when we were in the thick of it with surgical complications or setbacks, my professional hat took a back seat and I was just mom. And at those times, I think I was probably like any other mom who had a NICU baby. And I dealt with sadness and exhaustion and feeling overwhelmed and frustrated and scared. We had some really big scares that first year with Reese, and there were several times I really didn't think we were going to make it out of there. So I had to work really hard to take care of my own mental health. And I even worked with a therapist for a while to deal with some of the trauma we experienced during a particularly challenging PICU admission that you were a part of and right there with me and for me. I think having the experience and knowledge was helpful, but it didn't negate the challenges that we all had to face when we had a child dealing with really scary, serious NICU circumstances. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I mean, I'm grateful that you mentioned that you were taking care of yourself because I think sometimes as the mom, we tend to default like, how can I best take care of my child, which we should. But then
Right.
sometimes we forget that we also, in order to take care of the people that we love, we also have to take
Right.
care of ourselves. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Oh, so important.
And if there's anybody that taught me about advocacy, it's you. What to ask for, clarifying questions. That's a whole other podcast episode. But I think that there are many benefits to therapy and certainly getting the help that you need personally, but also the help that you need for your child. So, Dina, does a parent know, like if a mom and a dad is listening to this, how would they know when psychology may benefit their child? And we're talking about a child, who's a little bit older, they've been out of the NICU for a few years, and the parent is starting to see them in new situations and some things may be coming up. How would they deal with that?
Well, I mean, if you're asking kind of how to know when your child might benefit, I would say as a parent, it sometimes can be really hard to distinguish between what's normal, typical behavior and behavior that might be indicative of a bigger issue. We expect that children are going to have bad days and meltdowns and outbursts from time to time, and especially younger children. And then we know, especially adolescents, can be a really challenging time as well. But a good rule of thumb is that, if your child's issues seem to be interrupting their ability to get through the day on a somewhat frequent basis, or the issues are preventing your child from functioning optimally, then it might be time to seek some outside help. As a psychologist, I'm always interested in assessing like some key areas, like how they're doing at home with their family, how they're doing at school, how their grades are, how they're doing socially with friends, their sleeping and eating habits, their hobbies and interests. So, we kind of look at those areas to be able to say, are we seeing changes or struggles consistently over time that might suggest the need to take a closer look? So, if you kind of like some key things that I would tell people as signs to kind of keep an eye out for, if you notice that their mood or behavior has changed, I mean, as their parent what's typical for your child. So if you're seeing noticeable changes in their mood or behavior, it can suggest that they're struggling. And then if they've experienced a major life change or stressor and they're struggling to cope or adjust, that can also be another sign. Typically you're going to have trouble in the beginning if there's a big change like a divorce or a move or a death in the family or a new diagnosis. But typically we expect that, after a few days, after a few weeks, things start to settle down. So if you're not seeing those intense reactions start to dissipate and settle, if symptoms persist or get worse, or they start to interfere with their day-to-day functioning, then, it would be a good idea to consult a mental health provider.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of parents who find themselves, particularly I'm talking about NICU babies who might be towards the end of their elementary school years, that fourth, fifth grade when it's a big developmental jump,
Yeah.
or into middle school when they start to discover who am I, what's my purpose in the world, and oh, everyone around me has a lot of opinions, and then you throw in some hormones. Sometimes I think it's hard, Dina, for parents to distinguish what is normal adolescent behavior and then
Yes.
what is related to the NICU stay or how we're dealing with, like you said, a medical diagnosis. I think, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, I think that has been one of our biggest challenges is what is normal for normal kids and then
Yeah.
what is normal for my NICU baby.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's been a lot of research that's shown that babies that are born prematurely do have a higher risk of developing mental health problems. There have been some studies that have found children and adolescents who had a NICU admission are nearly twice as likely to have a mental health diagnosis. And you tend to see more things like separation anxiety, and just general phobias, ADHD, etc. So, understanding that birth outcomes, whether it's prematurity or a medical complication, that we know that those can be risk factors for mental health challenges, and therefore being able to identify and support those children is really, really critical. But at the end of the day, we may just not know the exact root cause of a challenge or a mental health issue that arises. Because it's often due to such a complex interweaving of factors, including genetics and environment. So, really, when push comes to shove, I think the most important thing is just identifying the symptoms, figuring out how they're limiting a child's ability to function or thrive, and give them interventions that improve their ability to cope and manage day to day life. So, sometimes the root cause is not going to be the most important thing. It's more improving function. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, that's really good. That's really good advice. This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app, join one of our support groups, or find one-to-one support, enjoy counseling, find loss and bereavement support, participate in a peer-to-peer mentor program, or check out our news, articles, and family stories at handtohold.org. All of that is at no cost to you. Hand to Hold's mission is to provide personalized support before, during, and after a NICU stay to help ensure that all NICU families thrive. I think that when you are working with a child, Dina, like how do you define what a successful outcome is of having them visit with you as a psychologist? What would you look at and say, yes, these things we did worked, and I'm seeing, X, Y, and Z on the other side. What are some things that you would consider, yes, that was a success?
I think it really depends on each child and family because every child and family has their own definition of what success is going to look like. So, as a psychologist, it's important for me to understand what the child's goals are and the parent's goals are with regard to treatment and kind of partner together with them to set really specific, measurable goals. So, I might have my own goals, but it may not be what their goals are. And then, so I have to always be mindful of that. Ultimately, my hope would be that we see a decrease in the, whatever symptoms are going on, we see a decrease in the frequency of those or the intensity of those. So, for example, if they're having, massive tantrums and meltdowns, that we start to see that those are happening less frequent. And when they do happen, they're less intense or that they recover more quickly. That they're using tools and skills to cope better with whatever challenges they're facing, and that overall their mood is happier and they feel more confident in day-to-day life. So at the end of my initial evaluation, I always encourage patients and the parents and families to identify what progress is going to look like to them. How will they know if things are better? And then regularly check in to see what they feel is improving and what we still need to address.
Those are good pieces of advice. I mean, I think as a parent's listening to this, they're probably thinking, okay, those sound like good things. I know maybe what I want my desired outcome to be for my child, but the biggest part is, how do I find a good child psychologist for my child and for my family? Like, where do you go to differentiate what makes a good fit, and also how do you find them where you live?
Yeah, and this is not an easy question to answer succinctly, so I'm going to do my best. I think it's important for me to preface it by saying if you're seeking help for your child, it's clear you're already worried and concerned. And the process of finding the right help can be challenging and very time consuming. So it's really important that you take care of yourself and know you're not alone. It's often helpful to start with your child's pediatrician because they have a known list of resources that they've come to trust over time. So you want to make an appointment and bring a list of concerns with you and have some examples ready to share. I think that's really important because they're going to want some details and examples that you can give them to kind of set the context. And if you have time before that appointment, also try to get feedback from your child's teachers or other people who are closely involved in your child's life, because it's really helpful to have information about how your child is doing across different settings. You can also start by asking friends of yours or other parents if they have recommendations and suggestions, because I guarantee you are not alone. And many of your friends or other parents are in the same boat looking for help or have received help from another mental health provider. Um, this is kind of where it gets tricky. I will say most experienced and trusted providers have long waiting lists right now. There's always tended to be a shortage of qualified mental health providers for children, but with COVID, the number of people that are needing and seeking care has really increased. So I just encourage you to call, and call again. I know it can be really frustrating if you don't receive a call back or an email response in a timely manner. And I can say this from someone who's worked in different settings, including private practice for many years. But the ones who are typically in private practice don't have administrative support. So they spend their day seeing patients and writing reports and talking to schools. And it's hard to manage returning calls from prospective people that they don't even know on a daily basis. So just be persistent and be flexible. You're much more likely to get a spot if you are willing to come whenever an opening is available, rather than if you say, well, we'll only do after school appointments. Once you're established, you can always, work on changing the time and the schedule. The goal is just to get in the door because people are always transitioning out. But so I would just say, ask to get put on a waiting list. And if there isn't one, just keep calling back and be the squeaky wheel. The squeaky wheel is going to eventually get that oil. There are some resources. If you've kind of already exhausted your pediatrician's list, You can also go on a website called Psychology Today. There is a search function for finding a therapist. And what I love about this resource is that it has different filters that you can search with as far as your insurance, the age of the person you're seeking therapy for, if there's a specific issue, like is it more of a medical psychology issue? Is it ADHD? Is it anxiety? You can search by zip code, by gender of therapist. So it's a good way to kind of start. And then it will spit out a list for you. And then you can start looking through that list and kind of determining who might seem to be a good fit. I think it's important that once you reach out to people that you ask some questions about their experience with the issue that you're looking to get some help with and their style. You can ask how progress is measured and understand how they're going to update you as the parent on your child's progress and concerns. I think it's important to ask if their approach that they're recommending is backed by research. There are some really gold standard interventions that, as a psychologist, we know work and have been proven to be effective. And then there are some that are not. So kind of find out if what their recommendations are backed by research. And then once you have selected a provider, I think it's always good to assess how that fit seems to be for you and your child, and make sure that it's someone your child is comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, if your child is comfortable with that provider and they have a good working relationship, it leads to better outcomes. So, in addition to Psychology Today, you can also go. I mean, most of you are probably in Texas, but I'm sure, people listening from other states. You can go to the State Psychological Association website. Like for Texas, it's the Texas Psychological Association. There's also a Find a Provider link on that site as well. So it's a way to maybe kind of compare lists and get some other names and options. But that's kind of how I would start.
Those are excellent pieces of advice. I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think I even thought to do the most simple thing was to ask the pediatrician. They are the gateway to so
Yeah,
many people, not
yeah,
just psychologists, but specialists that your child may need. And certainly they have
yeah.
history in many cases that they may have been your doctor for
A long
many
time.
months or many years, right? So they know your family and they also know your child and know what's important to you. So that's a great way to start. Dina, I always ask this question of every guest at the end because I think advice is something that comes from life experience and learned experience. So if there is a parent listening to this that's seeking psychological help for their child, what's the best piece of advice that you would give them?
Well, I think to just trust your gut and don't give up. Early intervention and being able to catch things early are going to make it much more likely to get progress before things get worse. Um, you got to be persistent right now in this age of COVID and everybody seeking help and long waiting lists. But if you are really concerned and you ever are imminently concerned about your child's safety or well being, you can always go to the ER 24/7. They have people who are able to evaluate them to make sure that they are safe and can get what they need. Don't give up.
That's a good way to end it. Dina, thank you for all your good perspective and all your good advice.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to offer, if anybody has a question specifically or needs help looking at someone's credentials or wanting to understand something, I'm happy to be available to help in that capacity. I feel really passionate about helping people get where they need to go.
Well, we'll make sure that we link to all those things in the show notes. But thank you, Dina. Well, it is not often that I get to talk to a dear friend who also happens to have an exceptional professional background in psychology. For years, y'all, I have been bending her ear, asking her for advice with my own preemie baby, with my own mental health, and she has been such an amazing friend and given me such excellent advice. So it was a real honor to share some of that with y'all today. In today's 2-minute take, there are many things that I could reflect on and sort of hone in on, but I think these two are the ones that I want to focus on today. One, and I'm really grateful that she said it, even though our topic today was helping your child and do they need psychological attention? Do they need help with that? I'm really, really grateful that Dina, and she did it and she didn't even know that, but that she circled us all the way back to the beginning of our series, and that it's important to take care of yourself. She even talked about how she addressed her own mental health when her son was in the NICU and in his vast number of hospital stays. So taking care of yourself is equally important as it is of taking care of your child. So that was one thing that I think is worth mentioning, and certainly ties each one of these pieces and parts of this mental health series together. And then the second is mental health has, I think, come to the forefront of people's hearts and minds, and we're willing to talk about it. I think years ago we would whisper, we would say things like, do you have a therapist? Does your child need this? And we were almost ashamed in a way. And I think post-pandemic that we are looking around saying life can be difficult. And especially if you have a NICU baby, life can be hard, and it is okay. Your child may be even more likely to need help because of that NICU stay, but they are not broken. Sometimes we all need help from time to time. And I hope that the practical advice that Dina shared, certainly what we heard from Dr. Mittenall in child psychiatry, maybe a little bit of our lived experience with my husband and I, and what Regina and Dr. Boyd shared with marriage and family therapy, that there are a vast number of resources out there. They gave you great ways to access that help and help you and your child be better tomorrow than you are today. And I hope that this series has allowed you and given you the tools to do just that. So we have more amazing podcasts coming the rest of the summer. So put us on your list, subscribe to us, and we will see you next time. Thanks, y'all, for listening to NICU Babies Parent Support. Every parent and every experience is welcome here. If you are a NICU parent and you're finding yourself in need of support, please download our app. You can find it in the Apple Store or on Google Play, Hand to Hold. And if you love today's episode, you can share it, you can subscribe, and you can most certainly review it. We would love, love, love your reviews. It's how we reach more NICU parents. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.